What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Bleeding BnG. We're at episode 11. So, guys, we're getting this content out. We're pushing these episodes out as we get closer to the NFL draft. Draft season is here. So we're going to go ahead and give you full-fledged draft coverage in this episode. So like we did in our previous episode, episode 10, where we gave you some realistic draft options on the offensive side of the board for some prospects entering the 2021 NFL draft for Washington. We'll be doing the same in this episode, but this time we'll be doing the defensive side of the ball. So we have a lot of prospects to cover, and we have a lot of information that I want to give to you guys. Like I said, you guys can use, like I said in the prior episode, you guys can use Bleeding BnG as your draft guide to get you prepared for the 2021 NFL draft. So we gave you the offensive position prospects to look out for in our last episode. So today is defense. Today is time for the defense. But before we get into this draft information, guys, there's been some news and information regarding the Washington football team that has happened or that has come up since our last episode. So last Friday, actually to give us a time step on today's episode, it is actually Tuesday, April the 5th at about 11 p.m. So last Friday, Coach Rivera actually had his first press conference since free agency has started, and he dropped a lot of gems. There were a lot of gems that were taken out of that press conference. Maybe the biggest gem was that he actually revealed that Ryan Fitzpatrick will actually go into training camp as the number one, as the starter, but there will be a competition between, Taylor Heinicke, himself, and Kyle Allen. So he did say that, Ryan Fitzpatrick is the presumed starter for right now, but he will have to, earn his keep and earn his security for that position throughout a training camp battle. Also, Coach Rivera, one of the biggest things that I took out from the press conference is that he's a William Jackson III guy. And like I told you guys in one of the prior episodes, that William Jackson III is probably my favorite off-season signing. And I think it might be Coach Ron as well. He was just giving William Jackson such high praise. So I can tell that this defense, especially, Coach Rivera and Coach Del Rio, they're excited about that William Jackson signing and has, big plans for the future. Another thing that I got from the press conference is that organizational alignment that I was talking about in my earlier episodes when, this series first started or this podcast first started. I was starting to see that in Coach Rivera's press conference. He was giving high praise to Marty Herney and Martin Mayhew. Constantly. He called those guys role warriors. He said those guys really, get into the film, whether that be with college prospects or NFL prospects. So he had a lot of praise for those guys, and I'm starting to understand why, he felt comfortable hiring those guys and bringing in those guys to work alongside those guys. As you know, the Washington football team has this coach-centric approach that we've adopted since we hired Coach Rivera last year. So that's it for the Washington football team news and notes. And yeah, it's time to get into the draft coverage. So like I said, guys, today's episode is all about realistic draft options that I think, can be attainable for the Washington football team within the first half of the draft. So within the earlier rounds, particularly rounds 1 through 3. As you remember in our last episode, we said that we were working with rounds 1 through 3 because as you work later in the draft, the entire draft is a crapshoot. But as you get later into the draft, it's like really a crapshoot, and it's like almost like you have to have an inexact science to predict where some of these guys go because you don't know how high some teams view this guy on their board as compared to other NFL circles and fans communities, NFL mock draft sites and things like that. So like I said, these are realistic draft options for the Washington football team within the first 3 rounds or within their first 4 or 5 picks. So to start off at 19, I will start off with, the best prospect that I think that may potentially be available at 19, and that is Micah Parsons. So, guys, I want to start by saying that I do believe that Micah Parsons is a top 5 talent, but there are some reasons that he may slip in the draft. He did opt out of this last season, the 2020 season, due to, the coronavirus pandemic. So we haven't seen him play in almost 2 years, and there's also been numerous numerous character concerns that have come out about Michael Parsons throughout, the NFL draft process or this draft season. Some of them that are very graphic and very concerning. But I do think that he is the best player attainable at 19. He's 6'3", 245-pound linebacker out of Penn State, and he is a heat-seeking missile. He is a heat-seeking missile when tracking down the ball. He is a freak athlete. At his pro day, he ran a 4.39 40 for somebody that's 6'3", 245 pounds. Guys, that is insane. And when we last saw him on the football field, he was out there in the Big Ten week in and week out giving menacing hits. He won, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year as a sophomore. So this guy is a special talent. No doubt about it. So there is reason to believe that he should be drafted before 19 because that's what his talent warrants. But like I said, with the character concerns and us not seeing him in 2 years, you never know with the crapshoot that the NFL draft is. And he does have some flaws to his games. He does tend to rely on his athleticism a little too much. When taking on blockers and things, he tends to try to chase blocks to the point of attack and things like that instead of taking on blockers head on, which I think he can do because, he's not a small guy. At 6'3", 245 pounds, he's more than big enough for a prototype NFL linebacker in the today's day and age. So like I said, guys, he's a heat-seeking missile. He's somebody that's going to instantly help your run game because, like I said, he's somebody that relies on his athleticism, but I think that his instincts are good enough where that, he can use those as well as his athleticism. He can combine those to become the freaky special player that I think he has the potential to become. So the best player that I think that's attainable at 19 is Michael Parsons, linebacker from Penn State, and that's if he slips in the draft. I've seen mocks go with him going as high as 7 to 8, and I've seen mocks have him slipping to like 26 due to the character concerns and things like that. But don't get me wrong, this is a top 5 talent, and I would be ecstatic if he's still there at 19. We should run to the podium. Like I told you guys with Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and those guys last week, we should run to the podium if Michael Parsons is there at 19 because he's guys, like if we're being honest, the run defense was the weak spot of our defense last year. The Giants ran on us in both games. Detroit ran on us when they wanted to. The Detroit Lions ran on us when they wanted to. I remember DeAndre Swift going off in that game. And then you bring in somebody like Michael Parsons, that'll be a neutralizer. Like I said, he's somebody that instantly helps your run defense. Penn State didn't really put him in coverage as much, but with his athletic traits and his athletic abilities, there's no reason why I don't think that he can become an adept, an adequate coverage linebacker in NFL. Somebody with those measurables and that type of speed. It's up to how good he wants to become at covering, honestly, because like I said, this is a freak of nature that we're talking about. So I'm going to keep it in the lines of linebackers because I think that's the most likely position that we go to in the defense if we do draft defense at 19 in round 1. So the next linebacker that I want to talk about is Jalen Davis, linebacker out of the University of Kentucky, and this has been this is my new draft crush, guys. Like I know a lot of people have been saying that he's rising up draft boards, but he's somebody that actually caught my eye during the season. Jalen Davis is about 6'4", 34 pounds, and in his pro day, he ran a 4.41 40 with over a 40-inch vert and about 11-inch broad jump. 11-foot broad jump. Guys, that's freaky numbers. For somebody that's 6'4", 235 pounds, that's freaky numbers. So we're talking about freak athletes when we're talking about Michael Parsons and Jalen Davis. He's somebody that, like I said, he caught my eye during the season. He's been rising up draft boards throughout the draft process, but I actually remember watching a game live against the University of Florida where I was like, who is this linebacker that's running stride for stride with Kyle Pitts? Guys, Kyle Pitts is a generational tight end talent and prospect out of the University of Florida. And, while they weren't matched up in coverage throughout the game, or particularly a lot, when he did have to match up with Kyle Pitts, he did better than any linebacker that I saw, or any safety that for that matter, or any defender for that matter, facing Kyle Pitts this year. There was a couple seam routes where he was running stride for stride with Pitts, where Kyle Trask didn't even look to throw the ball. I know there was a corner route that he had well covered, which he Trash still tried to get it there, but Davis was there, defending it. And this is a linebacker, guys. This is a linebacker that is 6'4", 235 pounds. And like I said, I think he has good eyes. He has good eyes in both the pass and the run game. He sees passing lanes. He has a good understanding of passing concepts, and that's something that you need if we're going to run a zone-heavy defense like we did last year. And like I said, it's in both the pass and the run game. So he's somebody that sees holes opening before they're there for running back. So he's meeting a lot of running backs in the hole. And while he's not necessarily a thumper, he does attack the ball, and he does, get the guy down on the ground. He's a long arm linebacker with 33-inch arms, and like I said, my biggest question about him is his ability to shed blocks. And he has really good instincts, like I said before. So he wasn't in this scenario or in this circumstance a lot where he had to take on a lot of blockers, because he would usually beat those guys to the point, or he would beat those guys to the football. But there were instances where, I would like to see him have a harder punch when taking on linebackers, or when shedding linemen and taking on linemen and things like that. Something that you're really going to have to do in the NFC East when you got teams like the Dallas Cowboys and, the Philadelphia Eagles of the past 5 years that can and will run the ball down your throat if they see that as a weakness. So I'm all in the Jamin Davis fan camp as well. The next linebacker that I want to talk about is JOK. A lot of people know this guy, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the linebacker out of Notre Dame. He is 6'1", 221 pounds, and he has 33-inch arms as well. And if you guys see if you guys notice when I mentioned his weight, he's pretty light. He has a pretty light frame at 221 pounds, but he's a long athlete and he's versatile. He's somebody I think can play the wheel in a 4-3 scheme. He's somebody that I think can play strong safety at times, and he can be a big nickelback, which is what Notre Dame had him do a lot this past season. He was covering the slot in a lot of instances, and he wasn't necessarily, playing man-to-man, but in a lot of zone schemes, he would have hurt curl responsibilities or curl to flat responsibilities, and he was able to show that he can hold up in coverage. One of my favorite things about JOK is that while he is light for a linebacker with frame, he's one of the hardest hitters in the draft. As I've mentioned before, there was a college game day feature where, a professor at one of the universities did a formula for actually how hard this dude was hitting people. And this is a linebacker, I was mentioning Michael Parsons is 245 pounds. So JOK is about 25 pounds lighter than this dude. And I actually think that JOK is probably the hardest hitter out of this group of guys that I'm mentioning today. Like I said, he will be an enforcer on your defense. The weight does scare me because that puts him in kind of like the tweener category where we saw Isaiah Simmons at last year. And if you guys can remember from this past football season, the Arizona Cardinals had times, especially early in the season, find out how to deploy Isaiah Simmons. He came on a lot later in the season, but that was actually when they were actually moving him off the ball and having him play like the quasi-safety type role, even though he was projecting to move from safety to linebacker in the NFL coming out of Clemson. He actually saw a lot of his success late in the season playing a quasi-safety type role, and I don't know if you're going to have to make those type of adjustments for JOK, but that tweener label, that 6'1" to 6'2", 220 to 225 pound size frame, that Deion Buchanan, it kind of does scare me because, like I said, guys, we're in the NFC East where you do have teams that will punch the ball down your throat if they see that this is a weakness. These are the teams that, you play 6 games out of the year. This is where the bulk of your schedule comes from. So you got to have, I always think that you have to consider, the teams in your division when you're drafting and when you're building your team, because those are essentially those are the teams that you're trying to place ahead of, and those are the teams that you're going to be competing with the most in the season. So like I said, I love JOK as a prospect, and I think his versatility is amazing. That's something that's going to really appeal to Coach Del Rio and Coach Rivera. But that is he a tweener? Do we know where to play him? Like I said, I do think that he can play the wheel in the 4-3, but we would have to have linebackers. Our linemen, that Alabama wall that we talk about so highly of, they would have to keep JOK clean nearly the entire game, because once a linebacker gets to, once a lineman gets to him on the second level and gets his hands on him, it's a wrap. And it's honestly hard for somebody to, or it's honestly hard for us as fans to expect somebody that's 6'1", 221 pounds to be shedding blocks with these guys that's 6'5", 6'6", 315 pounds. So I can see him playing like that big Buffalo position that Cam Curl played a lot early in the season before Landon Collins got hurt. And like that gives you an advantage because, you know, when offenses are figuring out what packages to come out in, if you don't have to swap out a base, they don't know. You know, you can slide JOK out and, hey, maybe slide the linebackers over and just run four linemen with you know, your three backers covering, you know, 11 personnel, which is so popularly used in today's game. So I love JOK as a versatile chess piece type defender. My biggest knock on him is while he is a hard hitter and probably the hardest hitter in the draft, he does have some inconsistencies as a tackler because he is always looking for that knockout blow. And I think that does have something to do with his size as well. You know, when you're 221 pounds and you're throwing your body at these 230 and 240 pound linebackers and running backs, and you're throwing your body at running backs that may be, you know, your size, you know, that's going to take a toll on you at that frame. So that's my biggest knock on JOK is his inconsistencies as a tackler. But I do think if he's the selection at 19, you automatically upgrade your defense because you get a defensive chess piece that offenses won't know how to, you know, maneuver around, and you also get an enforcer on the defense as well, who somebody's going to set the tone with every tackle that they make. All right, to round out the first round linebacker options, the last one I want to talk about, and it's somebody that I actually talked about in our mock offseason episode a couple weeks back, and that's linebacker Zaven Collins out of Tulsa. He's huge. He's 6'4", 260 pounds. In his pro day, he ran, you know, somewhere where the high 4.6s to 4.7s 40. And, you know, honestly, before his pro day, he's somebody that I thought might actually test a little better because he looks like a good athlete in space. One of the things, or a couple of the things that I do like about him is that he seems to be a good blitzer, with whether that be like delayed blitzes coming from the middle of the field at the middle linebacker at the Mike position, or whether that be rushing off the edge. He had one of the highest pass rushing percentages, regardless of any position in the country. And I know that's coming out of Tulsa, but you see that the pass rushing capabilities are there, and he does give you, you know, he does have the size and the frame of an edge type rusher. You know, more off ball inside linebackers. They're, you know, typically, you know, 6'2" to 6'3", you know, 200 to 30, 245 pounds. But this guy's 6'4", 260 pounds. So that's close to like Chase Young size guys playing at the, you know, inside off ball linebacker position. One of the things that I didn't like though is that for somebody this big, you know, I think that he can do a better job shedding tackles. And I think that's due to I think that he has poor instincts. So, you know, and poor play recognition. So, you know, he tends to let, you know, offensive linemen get up to him before he realizes where the ball is going. Kind of opposite from what I was saying with Jamin Davis, who has a good ability to track the ball. But I think that, you know, if you improve those instincts for Collins, and he can be a tremendous player because he's somebody that you can use as a chess piece as well. Like I said, he's good rushing off the edge, he's good rushing up the middle, and he's a good athlete. He's somebody that I actually think can stand to lose about 10 to 12 more pounds and become even more twitchier, because at 6'4", 260 pounds, he moves well in space. You know, while the 4.7 40 time isn't knocking anybody's socks off, especially compared to some of the names that I mentioned before, we got to consider this guy is 15 pounds heavier than Micah Parsons. He's 25 pounds heavier than Jamin Davis. So, you know, running 0.3 of a second slower or 0.2 of a second slower isn't that bad. You know, it's almost nearly as freaky when you especially consider like that's them running with a 25-pound weight vessel essentially. They still able to run these 4.3s and 4.4s and things like that. So I do like Zaven Collins. His pro day didn't scare me off like I did see that it scared some people in the Washington football team community off. It didn't scare me off as much. But he would probably, if I would have to rank the four linebackers that I just mentioned, I would probably go Micah Parsons 1. But I know the likelihood of him slipping isn't very high, but there is always a possibility that I would probably go Jamin Davis 2. JOK, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah 3, and Zaven Collins 4. But I think that if you add any of those 4 guys to your defense at 19, you're going to improve your defense because, the linebacker core was the weakest core of the defense last year. I think anybody with 2 eyes can actually see that. It's in need of a upgrade. It's in need of a major injection. So that's for the linebacker position. And while I don't think that we would, that's honestly that or the safety position where there's only one guy who I think would actually be worth a pick at 19 or worth our pick in the first round, and that's Trayvon Moehrig. He's a safety out of TCU. He's 6'1", 202 pounds, and at his pro day, he ran a 4.5 flat. And what I like about Moehrig is he's versatile and he is aggressive, guys. He's a safety that'll run the alley and he'll knock your head off. Like, he's that type of guy, and he's not the biggest guy. He's 202 pounds, and if you guys don't know what I mean by run the alley, he's somebody that, tracks the ball from the safety position and meets it head on. Meets it almost at the perfect angle every time so that, extra yards aren't needed because he's meeting you where, where the meet point is, and he's knocking you back, and he's being the enforcer that, we need on the last line of the defense. He's aggressive, and like I said, he's versatile. He can play deep, and I've seen him make plays on the ball as the deep safety, or he can play in the box, and that's one of my it's one of my favorite things about him as a prospect, because I'm honestly shying away from strong safeties throughout the draft prospect, because you got to consider, I don't think that we'll be able to get Landon Collins' contract off the book, and I think that Cam Curl is more of a strong safety. So with Moehrig's ability to play free, while also, having the ability to, interchange with Cam Curl or Landon Collins every now and then and be a split safety or play in the box, that his versatility is actually what is valued him as, like I said, the only safety that I would take at 19. One of my only thing, and like I said, I have seen him make plays on the ball, so this may be like a consistency type of thing or a focus type of thing, is his depth of awareness when he does play deep sometimes. His spatial awareness seems to be a tad bit off, but he's such a good athlete and his instincts are so good outside of that spatial awareness trait that he's able to compensate for it a lot. And I know dealing with Troy Apke, where I think that he has a depth of perception issue as well. I don't know if that's what you want out of your last line of defense and out of your safety position. But I would, if Moehrig is on the board at 19, which he may be, because I haven't really seen him projected at anything higher than 19, and I've seen him projected, in the later first round, in the later half of the first round. So I would love the Trayvon Moehrig pick at 19. And to top off or to finish up round 1, the only cornerback that I can see us taking is Patrick Surtain if he falls. I think that Patrick Surtain is the cream of the crop for the cornerback position in this draft. You got other good corners like J.C. Horn out of South Carolina, and the guy Caleb Faison out of Virginia Tech. But the only way that I see us selecting a cornerback in the first round at 19 is if Patrick Surtain falls. Patrick Surtain is a prototype corner. He's about 6'1", 210 pounds. He ran a 4.35 40, and he's been locking receivers up in the SEC for 3 years. He's Patrick Surtain, the former corner's son, and that's the only way I see us, spending a selection on a cornerback in the first round. And the reason that I say that is, guys, we got to remember that we did just give William Jackson a $14 million contract, and while that's not break the bank money, we do have $24 million tied up in our cornerback position between Heat and Kendall Fuller. So I don't think that we're going to go ahead and sign another cornerback to a first round deal who's potentially going to be in line for another big contract when his first round contract ends. So those are the realistic draft options that I can see Washington selecting at 19 in the first round of the draft. And those were the linebackers that I mentioned, Trayvon Moehrig, and the only cornerback that I can see them selecting is Patrick Surtain, the cornerback out of Alabama. So moving to 51 and the second round of the draft, there are a slew of names that I can actually see Washington entertaining at 51. The first one is Richie Grant. He's a 6-foot safety out of 190. I said out of excuse me, out of UCF, and he is 195 pounds. So like I said, guys, I'm becoming more attracted to free safeties for the Washington football team because I think that's what we need for our roster, and I think that's what is going to best fit our roster. Richie Grant is actually, I think he's the second best free safety in the draft behind Morig. He has good instincts, which allows him to make a lot of plays on the ball. I think I saw a stat where he had about 16 interceptions over his last 34 games or things like that. He had a really strong Senior Bowl week. The only question that I really have is he does have some inconsistencies as a tackler, which somebody that's 195 pounds may have, especially in the NFL when you're tackling 235-pound running backs. And I don't know if he's that elite athlete and he's going to give you that elite level range. Like I said, he had a lot of interceptions, but I think that was a lot due to he's a smart football player. He has really good instincts. He was able to, make a lot of plays before the plays were there due to his instincts. But in the NFL, instincts isn't always going to help you out. You got to have some, athleticism or some superior athleticism to make plays on the ball. So I don't know if he's that elite level athlete, and that's honestly the only reason why I don't see him getting drafted in the first round. And that's Richie Grant. That's a safety out of UCF. The next player that I want to mention is a linebacker out of Missouri, which is Nick Bolton. He is 5'11", 240 pounds. And he's a shorter linebacker. He's downhill. He reminds me a lot of Denzel Perryman. One of the concerns I have is him in coverage. He's not necessarily a bad athlete, but he's an average athlete. And when you get those guys, when you're covering this as a linebacker, you tend to be covering the middle of the field. So you'll deal with 6'4" to 6'5" tight ends where you're covering the seams, or you're dealing with quick, shifty slot receivers and things like that. So I don't think he has that athleticism where he's going to be a coverage linebacker, and he's 5'11", so he's either going to be checking those quick, shifty slot receivers, or he's going to be checking these big, tall tight ends and giving up 6 or 7 inches. But one of the things that I do like about him is he will smack you in the mouth. He's downhill all the time, all 4 quarters, and he's not going to give up on a play. He has a good punch when taking on linemen, and that's something that I like to see, especially at 5'11". He's somebody that'll meet you. He'll meet you, and he'll shed you off with his powerful hands and make the play on the linebacker. He looks a lot, and Washington football fans, I'm not saying that he's nowhere near the player. I'm just talking about stature. His stature reminds me a lot of London Fletcher. And if we can remember, London Fletcher is a potential Hall of Fame type talent, has a potential Hall of Fame type career. But as we moved later into his career, and as the NFL became more of a passing game, he became more of a liability in coverage. And it wasn't even that, his athleticism was so bad. It deteriorated at some points. But I can remember some people just making catches over London because he was 5'10". You see what I'm saying? And don't get me wrong, I love London Fletcher, one of my favorite Washington football team players of all time. But there were some instances, where, his measurables just didn't stack up. And that's Nick Bolton. So that's another option that I think that the Washington football team will entertain at 51, along with Jabril Cox. He is a 6'3", 233-pound linebacker out of LSU, and he's actually somebody that transferred from North Dakota State University, the same school that Trey Lance and Carson Wentz went to. And one of the things that I liked about Jabril Cox is that, making that FCS to FBS jump, he didn't really lack athleticism. He wasn't at a deficit with his athleticism, and he's somebody that to me displayed good instincts. And while he doesn't really have a standout trait, he has a good all around game to me. There's sometimes where he may be engaged on blockers for a little bit too long, but I've seen instances where he's shedding a blocker quicker than I may expect. There's some instances where he is getting beat in zone coverages and things, but there's some instances where I'll see him bottling up a pass concept or sitting on a route in zone coverage. So, his biggest thing with me is his consistency. That may be due to the lack of experience playing, high level football. No shade to the FCS, no shade to North Dakota State. So I think he's a little wet behind the ears. And I think even with more experience, Jabril Cox can be a player for the Washington football team in the future. And then I do want to mention another player, and that's Boogie Basham. He's an edge, technically. Out of Wake Forest. He's about 6'3", 284 pounds. But the thing that I like about him is that he's a versatile player. He can play the D tackle position or he can play the D end position. He's compactly built, and he's a technical rusher. But he makes plays. Like, he makes plays happen. He's productive. He makes plays happen, and he has a relentless pursuit to the ball, which is something that I like as well. And he's a local kid coming from Virginia. So, I'm pretty sure, Ron and the guys doing their due diligence on all the guys, especially like the local kids like Boogie Basham and Christian Durasol and guys like that. So those are some potential names that I can see the Washington football team entertaining at 51 in the second round of the draft. So that's safety Richie Grant, linebacker Nick Bolton from Missouri, defensive end, defensive tackle Boogie Basham, 6'3", 280 pounds, out of Wake Forest, and then Jabril Cox, linebacker out of LSU. All right, moving on to the third round. So remember, guys, we have 2 picks in the third round. We have pick 74 and then picks 82. So there's a couple of guys that we can actually get in the third round. And guys, I know this may seem like I'm mentioning a lot of linebackers, and that's just because this draft class is very linebacker heavy. This draft class, honestly, I think that it has more offensive talent than defensive talent, but at a couple positions like cornerback position and the linebacker position, I think that this draft class is very deep and has a slew of talent that you can get in any round, 1 through 7, that can potentially make your roster and stick. So for the third round, there's a lot of linebackers that I want to mention again. The first one is Dylan Moses, linebacker out of Alabama. And he's somebody who, coming out after the 2018 season, he's somebody that, teams were projecting to, be a high selection coming out of his junior year, but he did sustain an ACL injury that he was coming back from in the 2020 season when he decided to stay for his senior year, and he didn't look like the same player that we had last saw fully healthy in 2018. 2018. So in this past season, it just looked like he was regaining form. So I think that he did lose a little bit of his athleticism, if we're being honest. I saw him become a liability in coverage in the SEC at Alabama this year. But he's somebody that's so good in the run game. Like, he's really good in the run game. He's somebody that I can start for you at Sam right away and give you and at least be a good 2-down linebacker that you may have to sub out when you transitioning out of your base defense and moving into sub packages and things like that. That's Dylan Moses out of Alabama. Like I said, really strong run defender. And I do think he has good instinct. I just think that he lost a little bit of his athleticism with that ACL injury, because in 2018, the last time that we saw him fully healthy, I was seeing him running down, tracking, run plays down from the backside and things like that. And you didn't really see that twitchiness or that explosiveness in his film in 2020. So, maybe, hopefully, this was, him getting used to, playing with that new ACL and things like that. And he can only go but up from the 2020 season. And his 2020 season wasn't horrible, so I don't want you guys to think that. He just looked like the shell of the player that potentially, that was, priorly projected to go potentially in the first 2 rounds. Another linebacker that I want to mention from another big school is Pete Werner, who actually shocked a lot of people by running a 4.5 at his pro day. And he has ideal size for either a Sam or a Will linebacker in a 4-3 defense. He sized out about 6'3", 240 pounds. And like I said, the way that he tested in his pro day honestly shocked me. Because when I watched his film, he's somebody that I thought had, average to below average athleticism, but really good instincts, and he found the ball, so he was in the right place at the right times a lot. But he had average instincts. But looking back at his pro day numbers, he's a pretty good athlete. So he's somebody that when I look at his tape actually is good. But he's somebody that I had questions about his athletic deficits. But he's somebody that can potentially shoot up draft boards now when you see those athletic numbers, like somebody with that size running 4.5. And I always thought that he was pretty decent in coverage. You see where there's plays where he's there in coverage, but he doesn't necessarily drive on the ball the fastest. So the receiver is actually able to make the catch, and that's why I thought he wasn't the fastest type of guy. But when he has 4.5 speed, maybe that's a technique thing that can be taught in the NFL. So he's actually somebody that shocked me, and like I said, he has great size at 6'3", 240 pounds. Another linebacker that I want to mention that we can either get at 74 or 82 or potentially a little later is Chad Surratt, a linebacker out of North Carolina. He's a shorter type linebacker at about 5'11", but he is a tackling machine. Over the last 2 seasons, he averaged about 10 tackles per game, and he's coming from the same school that Cole Holcomb came from. So I'm pretty sure you can get some good intel from a guy like Cole playing with Chaz. Chaz does have some size limitations and athletic limitations, but he's a film junkie. I can tell that because his instincts are amazing. And for his lack of size, he's somebody that takes on linemen and sheds blockers pretty well. So those 3 linebackers are potential options in the 3rd round at 74 or 82. Dylan Moses out of Alabama, Pete Werner out of Ohio State, or Chad Surratt out of North Carolina. I do want to get some secondary players in. A corner that I do potentially, that I do like, that may potentially be there in the 3rd round is Paulson Adebo. He's a corner out of Stanford. He's about 6'2". He has about 32 to 33 inch arms, and he's a good athlete for somebody that size. At Stanford's pro day, he ran about a 4.4, and before the 2020 season, he was actually projected to go early in the draft as well. His draft stock kind of slipped as well, but he's somebody that I can see the coaching staff taking a flyer on because he's a big boundary corner. And like I said, I don't necessarily see them spending too much draft capital in the early rounds, but this is where you start taking chances on guys with good measurables and good athletes. He gives you something that you don't necessarily have. Will Jackson is only 6 feet. He plays bigger than he is due to his long arm length, but somebody like Paulson will be, he'll automatically, like once he's drafted, he'll automatically be the biggest corner on your roster. He can match up with bigger receivers, and that's something that you'll need in the NFC East. I know, like I said, guys, I always keep the division in mind when I'm building my team. So you got to think when you're going against the Killing Galladays of the world, the Amari Coopers of the world, these bigger receivers, somebody like Paulson Adebo, who's a good athlete with tremendous size, has the potential to, has the potential to, one day match up with him under the right coaching, where he's getting, new techniques and better techniques to learn the position in the NFL. And then one of my sleeper picks, a pick that I love that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about until I heard Greg Cosell talk about this past week in a podcast that I was listening to. And I really listen to what Greg Cosell says when he's speaking, because he's somebody that I know is tied into a lot of NFL circles. And like I said, this is a name that I've been infatuated with this player for a couple of years, and me not hearing his name a lot on the mock drafts, in discussion boards in the Washington football team community kind of threw me off, because he's a player that I've been on his radar for a couple of years, and he's a player that is coming from that plays a position of need, and that's Andre Cisco, free safety out of Syracuse. Now, Cisco only played 2 games this past season because he got injured in the pregame warmups prior to the 3rd game that resulted in him sitting out the entire season. But in those 2 games, he had 12 tackles and 1 interception. In 2019, he had 5 interceptions in the big playing I think and Syracuse is in the ACC, playing in the ACC as a freshman. In his freshman year, he had 18 passes defended, and this isn't a little guy, guys. I said he is 6'1", 215 pounds. 215 pounds. You usually tend to think of your free safety, your rangy type free safeties being the smaller type, compact guys like a Earl Thomas type or like a Kevin Byard type. But he's somebody that gives you like Cam Curl size with elite level range. I don't have his testing numbers in front of me right now. I'm not sure if they've even tested yet, but I'm curious to see what his 40 time is because he at times has displayed elite level range, and I don't think that he's the fastest guy. So that may be due to his, instincts, as I mentioned before with other players, or that may be just due to, he's a better athlete than I gave him credit for. He's somebody that has very soft hands for a DB. If he gets his hands on the ball, he's making a play on the ball, and that's one of my favorite traits that I can get out of a DB. I like creating turnovers as a mindset. That's what I heard when I was playing football. And Andre Sisco has that mindset of, that football is in the air, that football is mine. He's attacking crossers, he's attacking drag routes, and he's just like when the ball, his pass coverage, there's really not a knock. Now, the reason that he may not be, mentioned as high up as other safeties or being mentioned in these mock drafts, and the reason that we may haven't heard his name as much is because he can use a lot of improvement in the run game. He isn't somebody necessarily that you want as the last line of defense, but remember, guys, we're doing Washington football team building. Cam Curl and Landon Collins, when healthy, prior to this year, I'm giving him a little credit. I know I'm reaching a little bit. But prior to this year, and when he was healthy, he was a pretty short tackler. And Cam Curl is a very short tackler. So, you can have that as your last line of defense. And then you can have a guy like Sisco roaming that back end, making plays on the balls and things like that. He's somebody that I think is better as a split safety more than, playing a lot of cover 3 or cover 1 single high as the free safety. And that's not necessarily a bad thing with this football team, because if you guys can remember from last season, we played a lot of cover 2 and a lot of cover 4 under Coach Del Rio, where, the split safety is ideal, and that's where, the split safety is utilized the most. So, guys, that's a lot of draft options that we gave you. We gave you some linebackers. We gave you some D linemen. We gave you some secondary players. We gave you a lot of coverage to look forward to as we lead up to the draft. Like I said, the draft is about 3 weeks away. Guys, we're actually doing a collab podcast with Tay and Todd, the Raw with Rio podcast, and a couple of other people that we'll actually be doing for the draft. So I want you guys to be on the lookout for that. As I always say, please follow our Instagram and our Twitter pages. Our Instagram page is at Bleeding BnG. That's Bleeding BnG. And then our Twitter page is at Bleeding BnG. The spelling's a tad bit different. That spelling on that handle is at Bleeding BnG. And then, guys, we're on all podcast platforms at this point. If you're using Apple, please feel free to subscribe. Please leave us feedback. Please rate. Those things help us out a lot as we try to advance and move forward in this business. Guys, like I said, I want Bleeding BnG to be your 24/7 number one source for everything Washington football team. So, you guys leaving feedback and leaving star ratings on our podcast and things like that helps us out a lot, because that pushes the algorithm forward. And then also for my YouTube fam, if you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe. Please subscribe. And if you're listening on audio only, but you want to subscribe to us on YouTube, you can find us by searching at Bleeding Burgundy and Gold or at Bleeding BnG. So that's it for episode 11, guys. Like I said, we're going to have some more draft coverage as we get closer to the draft. But, guys, it's time. I'm so excited, and I'm ready for the draft. Thank you guys for tuning in to episode 11 of the Bleeding BnG podcast. Can't wait to see you guys for episode 12. Thank you.